So, the Silent Hill 2 remake has been out now for a couple of weeks, and I have a number of thoughts I'd like to get out there about it. For context, I have played the remake for about 40 hours, according to Steam, across about 5 different playthroughs, and I'm also a long-time speedrunner of the original series of games. According to Twitch Tracker, I have streamed the original Silent Hill 2 for just under 400 hours. I'm not saying this to brag, I'm saying this so that you know that my experience with the remake is obviously coloured by my intense familiarity with the original game. If you're looking for some unbiased review from someone who's never played the original before, for whatever value of unbiased that would mean, you're not going to get it from me. I have played the original, I have played it a lot, I can't unplay the original, so that's the basis I'm going off of. But also I think it's important because I am, probably to a much greater extent than most people who would self-identify as Silent Hill fans, very interested in how they play. It comes with being a speedrunner, of course. Most Silent Hill fans I find are very interested in sort of the lore, the characters, that sort of thing. I, principally, interest myself with the gameplay element of these games. So, a couple things I want to establish before we jump in. The context of the release is a thing worth talking about. Right away from announcement, the vibe in the room was extremely negative about Silent Hill 2 Remake because it was from Bloober Team, and Konami taking a crack at Silent Hill again for the first time in a long time, and neither entity involved really had the best reputation. This in of itself reached a kind of cartoonish hostility very often on the internet. People would shit on you for so much as suggesting that you were vaguely hopeful about the remake's prospects, and I will not lie, I did not have very high hopes myself, but I was kind of neutral on the whole thing. I am not a Bloober stan, but I am not a Bloober hater. I haven't really played any of their games up to this point, this would be my first one. But a thing that definitely coloured my expectations going in is that Silent Hill 2 Remake's a pretty cynical release, right? Like, we can all agree on this. I think if we can't agree on this, then you're not going to like the rest of this video. But I think it's pretty obvious that Silent Hill 2 Remake definitely exists because someone at Konami saw the recent success of the Resident Evil remakes, went eyes emoji at it, and put into action their plan to remake Silent Hill 2 as well. One of the big tells for this is that they immediately jumped to remaking Silent Hill 2. They didn't even start with the game that it's a sequel to. Which, you know, I know the fandom over the years has created this collective hype about Silent Hill 2 that it's the one you can play without having played any of the other games in the series. You don't need to play Silent Hill 1. And that's not untrue, there isn't any direct continuity, but Silent Hill 2 is stronger if you had played the original, so right away I'm kind of sad that no effort was put into maintaining that aspect of the experience for new players. People like that are just not going to get the same experience of having their expectations subverted from having played the previous game. Maybe you don't understand what I mean when I say that, considering, again, people very often say that Silent Hill 2 doesn't require any previous context to be played, and that's true. However, Silent Hill 2 plays off expectations established in the first game to surprise you. That's why it's a sequel. The number on the end isn't for show, guys. Perhaps the most basic example of this is that Harry Mason, protagonist of the first Silent Hill game, also has a wife who died a few years prior to the events of the game because of an unspecified illness. The difference is that when Harry says it, he's telling the truth. Whereas our boy James over here, well, that's a different story. Subversions like this are all over the place in the comparison between Silent Hill 1 and Silent Hill 2, and it could honestly warrant an entire video by itself, but that's not what this is about. Just know that I think out the gate that immediately indicates a level of cynicism towards the product they're even remaking in the first place, and that's a bit sad. Being cynical, however, doesn't necessarily preclude the game from being good. So I'm going to lead with my gut feeling here. I'm going to tell you how I felt about Silent Hill 2 Remake. Nothing complicated, nothing fancy. Just, do I think it's good or not? Yes, no. And then I'm going to work backwards to justify that opinion. Is Silent Hill 2 Remake a good game? Yes, I think so. I think it's a very well-crafted third-person shooter, the environmental detail is lovely, environmental navigation is generally compelling moment to moment, the combat is fine, it's relatively simplistic, but that's okay, the original's combat was also relatively simplistic, that's kind of how the game works. And overall I think Bloober did a surprisingly good job wrangling a pretty good game out of the not amazing context in which it had been produced. Everything seemed like it was going against them, and I think they really defied people's expectations of them, so good for them. Thumbs up. However, I also think that as a remake, Silent Hill 2 is very much a trend-chasing product of the times. It pushes no boundaries, it pushes no envelopes the way the original once did, and overall I feel like it's a game that's going to be forgotten by the ebb of time. In roughly 20 years or so, when companies inevitably neglect game preservation again, and neither version of Silent Hill 2 is available on modern platforms, I do not think this is the one that's going to be hailed as the all-time classic people still want ported. I just don't see it maintaining that kind of cultural purchase. And maybe that's unfair to Silent Hill 2 Remake, maybe it never had a real shot at that. It does underscore the futility somewhat of remaking one of the foundational classics of the medium like Silent Hill 2. But nevertheless, I cannot shake the feeling that Silent Hill 2 Remake isn't a timeless classic of its own. It's very much a product of its time. So why do I think that? So the second thing we need to establish, and how you react to this information will probably determine how you take the rest of the video. But I need to make it clear that Silent Hill 2 Remake is not Silent Hill 2 2001, like, at all in any way. This is a completely different video game with the same name. The two have almost no parity with each other moment to moment. They're arguably not even in the same genre anymore, the original being a tank-controlled survival horror game, and this being a very traditional third-person action game kind of beat. So if you want the experience of playing Silent Hill 2, the original, you're still going to have to seek out a way to play Silent Hill 2, the original. What you have received here is a completely new video game, for better and for worse in many instances. I mention this because these remakes are very often billed as a way to catch up on something missed, or as replacements for the original, which they really shouldn't be, but that is how they're marketed. And in particular, I've heard a lot of people say that this is a faithful remake, and I really have to wonder what the hell they're talking about when they say this, because no part of this game is the same as the original, none of it. I think the only thing people could possibly mean when they say that is that the broad strokes of the story are unchanged, and that's mostly true. So if you were concerned that Bloober would bulldoze the atmosphere and subtlety of the original narrative, then rest assured they have not done that. They have actually shown a remarkable amount of restraint in the process of remaking that story. And that's commendable, but they have definitely changed some things, quite a lot of things actually, and we will go over those. Let's start with the most obvious change, the graphics, the one thing that has truly been updated to the modern standard. Silent Hill has never looked so pretty. I am not immune to going ooh-ah at some nice graphics, and Silent Hill 2 does indeed have some nice graphics. In particular, Bloober's penchant for environmental design is put to very good use here. Every environment feels thick with grime and dirt and other unpleasantry. It's a scene that feels very vivid. Individual rooms in the apartment complex tell stories by themselves about the owners, from the weird knickknacks they leave lying around. There's a lot of good stuff going on here. I do commend this aspect of the game. It's a real looker. However, this has come at a significant performance cost. Silent Hill 2 Remake is perhaps one of the worst PC launches I've ever seen in my life, and I'm honestly a bit surprised it hasn't received more of a thrashing for this in the user reviews. It is almost impossible to get a consistent 60 FPS out of this game regardless of how good your computer specs are, and there's a whole feverish fan community based around mods and fan fixes and tweaks to the engine INI to try and get more stable performance out of it, but the absolute best you can do is maybe you get 60 FPS, but you still can never escape the stutters that will occur as you're wandering around. I, for instance, ran into a multitude of different issues over my playthrough. First, I had issues where the game would just frequently become unstable, and I would have to restart the game to regain my FPS. A lot of people would describe that as symptomatic of a memory leak. I have no idea what's going on there. I'm not even going to pretend like I know. I tweaked the settings and resolved that problem, but gained a new one where roughly every 40 minutes or so, the game would just careen to 3 FPS, max out my GPU and CPU, until I sat there for like a minute waiting for it to correct itself. No idea what's going on there. I only solved that by forcing the game to run in DirectX 11 mode via a launch parameter edit. It is stupid that I have to do this. Even the absolute best case scenario is still below par, in my opinion. This is not an acceptable release. They want to charge $70 for this thing, and it doesn't run stably on basically any computer that exists. Cool. And even the PS5 version is apparently not immune to this. Firstly, if you set it to performance mode, you're not even going to get consistent 60, because the PS5 sucks. And if you set it to quality mode, you will get 30 FPS, but with apparently not infrequent frame stutters. I'm saying apparently because I don't have the console version, I can't confirm, this is just what I've heard on the internet. But I have no reason to suspect those people are lying, so I assume it's true. So A for environmental detail, but F- for performance, so was it really worth it? Maybe it will be after some patching, you know how it goes with modern games these days. Albeit I am recording this a couple weeks out from release, and so far there has been no updates whatsoever, so I'm not exactly hopeful. So let's actually talk about the levels that you'll be exploring with these nice, but admittedly very poorly performing graphics. In general, they're quite good. They maintain that classic survival horror sensibility of searching around a maze for hidden doodads and keys to unlock doors. There's a very strong sensibility in the level design to create loops so that you can always go back on yourself without too much trouble to try new areas and such. In general, exploration flows pretty well, with I think the notable standout exception to this being the hospital, which I think is horrid. I hate this place. It's just too big, it takes too long to get from one side to the other, and the staircases are weirdly not symmetrical, only one of them goes up to the top floor and only one of them goes down. So you do very often find yourself needing to traverse from one side to the other, especially if you missed something. And that is a symptom of one of the major changes to the game that changes pretty much everything else around it that I'm really not that fond of: the length. The areas follow the same rough progression as the original. You go to the apartments, you go to the hospital, you go to the labyrinth, then you go to the hotel. That's all unchanged. What is very much changed is the fact that every individual area is now anywhere from 2 to 3 times as long as it was in the original. Silent Hill 2 2001 is an approximately 7 to 10 hour video game depending on how much you stop to smell the roses. Silent Hill 2 Remake is a 15 to 20 hour game. It's twice as long, and it has no good reason to be twice as long. I don't get the impression Silent Hill 2 Remake is as long as it is because the team had some grand vision for how to expand the story and expand the gameplay of the original. It's 20 hours long because that is how long your video game needs to be if you want to sell it for $70, and that's a shit reason to expand the length of a game by that much. And, maybe you don't perceive that as a bad thing. Punchy, why are you complaining that the game is longer? Isn't that a good thing? There's more game to play. Sure, but it impacts basically every aspect of the game here on down. The pacing of story events is very much tied to the length of the game. The story of Silent Hill 2 was not written to accommodate a 20-hour game, it was written to accommodate a 10-hour one. So there are stretches where the story events are more spread apart. And indeed, many completely new cutscenes have been inserted to accommodate this new pacing. These new cutscenes are very bizarre. They don't really accomplish anything, they don't hurt the overall story. They tend to just sort of go in circles to kill time, because the designers decided this is where a story event needed to go in order to accommodate this new severely elongated pacing of the game. With probably the standout weirdest one of these being this interlude where Maria takes you aside to a garden that now exists in Silent Hill for some reason to boringly recite a legend at you that basically explains the plot of the game in metaphor. Why did they add this? This is so confusing. It's not subtle, it's not scary, and it's even kinda cheesy. This is a very peculiar addition to make. And it's not in service to any grand artistic vision, it's in service to the market trends of the day. You can't sell a game for $70 if it's not about 20 hours long. And I don't really blame them for doing this. We saw the harsh reactions that Resident Evil 3 Remake got because it was so short. But this is one of the aspects of Silent Hill 2 Remake I find very depressing, that it sees Silent Hill 2 as a story and format to be warped into contemporary design and market trends of the day. There's more to it than that, but the long, exhausting levels are probably the biggest symptom of this. So let's get on to the second biggest symptom of this, the combat. Silent Hill 2 is now a third-person over-the-shoulder shooter, which it distinctly was not before. This in of itself fundamentally changes the genre of the video game from a tank control style, mainly fixed camera angle game, it's not always fixed camera, it depends on the scene, to a fairly traditional third-person over-the-shoulder shooter. If you've played any of these made in like the last 15 years, you know how this one works, they all play the same. Now, I didn't think they were going to remake this game with tank controls, but it is another example of how any idiosyncrasy in a video game is treated as a flaw to be reduced as much as possible, and that's really sad. But for what it's worth, the third-person combat here is fine. It's relatively simplistic, but that's okay. You either shoot the mans with 3 different kinds of gun, or you hit them with your melee attack. You also have a dodge mapped to the spacebar by default, which gives you a fairly generous helping of invincibility frames. This, however, fundamentally shifts the kind of game that Silent Hill 2 is as a combat system. I don't think enough focus gets put on how tank control horror games actually play with regards to combat. They're often dismissed as, oh, it's so awkward to control and aim, what is this crazy video game? But tank control games are very much games of spacing. You need to position yourself in the right place and assess if you have time to deal damage, to avoid taking damage yourself. This is amplified somewhat by the fact that you cannot back up quickly. which puts additional burdens on how you process the scene. It's not a twitch reflex kind of game, but there is a skill and a flow to managing combat in a tank control survival horror game, and it's one not often appreciated. This positional-centric emphasis is completely gone in Silent Hill 2 Remake because of this invincible dodge. If an enemy is winding up to hit you, hit the spacebar and you'll dodge out the way. And there is some fun to be had in learning enemy attack patterns and bobbing and weaving out of range and what have you. There's not no joy to be extracted from that, don't get me wrong, but it does change the emphasis of the combat system significantly. Something that very much annoys me, though, is that the game has gained Last of Us / God of War style move correction, as in when an enemy is winding up for a melee attack or you go in for one, the game will slide you towards your target or the enemy towards you, so that they'll always land the blow. Spacing is not only de-emphasized, it's basically not a thing anymore. If you see an enemy winding up for an attack just slightly out of range, you have to assume they're going to hit you anyway because they're going to slide towards you. This is really annoying, and means the only skill really being tested in the combat of this game is reflexes. Which, yeah, is a little out of place with the tone of the game. Survival horror games are meant to be somewhat slower paced, you're meant to take your time, it emphasizes the kind of thought space you're meant to be in as the protagonist. When you have an invincible dodge and every attack auto-corrects to you, that atmosphere kind of takes a hit. It's one of the classic examples of how a game's genre can inform its mood, its atmosphere, and its story in turn, and that aspect is also not appreciated by Silent Hill 2 Remake, which sees everything about the original as something to be replicated in the form of a modern game-approved control scheme, and that's really disappointing. There's a bit of a running theme with this ramble here, which is that the form it had to take in order to exist is disappointing, but Bloober did a pretty good job with what form they had. I think one of the bright spots of this release are the new boss fights. I do note they tend to take place in larger rooms than the original, presumably because positional emphasis is no longer really a thing, so fights in tight spaces would just become a clusterfuck real fast in this control scheme, which is fair enough, I suppose. It's another example of kind of not really getting the original's flow, but it's fine in the context of this new game, so whatever. Generally speaking, the boss fights have become longer and more dynamic in the remake, with more shifts in phase as the fights goes on, which does make them longer, but also does make them more interesting in some cases. A particular thing I would like to gush about is, I love the new Eddie boss fight. This is fantastic. You need to track him through the mist using only sound and the clinkling meat bags overhead, and then eventually it gets even more misty, and it's really tense and exciting. You know, you have this kind of unhinged man darting in and out of the fog surprisingly quickly, wielding a powerful revolver that does a lot of damage. It's suitably threatening. This is really good, and it's a very different flow of fight. Most of the boss fights in this game are against large, fleshy monsters who take a beating and don't really react that strongly when you hit them, which is okay. But there's really effective contrast when you fight Eddie because he doesn't actually have that much health, but he's very fast. And his fight uses a unique gimmick to fight with, which is very interesting. Gold star for this. I love this. I love this a lot. There's also the new Abstract Daddy boss fight, which I believe Masahiro Ito said on Twitter that had been improved in the remake, and while I don't really agree with the framing of improved when the remake and the original are fundamentally so different that it stymies any meaningful sort of comparison you could point to about what's been improved, but on this point, maybe I agree. The Abstract Daddy fight in the original was probably one of my least favorite fights in the entire game. It's a room that's just a bit too small with an enemy that's just a bit too big. The room is cool, but it's a little bland as a boss fight. In the remake, it's become a more compelling multi-part chase that really emphasizes the subject matter at hand as well. Furthermore, the Abstract Daddy is now unique to this boss fight, which gives it more gravitas within the narrative. In the original Silent Hill 2, the game starts to reuse this enemy as of the last area, which sort of takes away some of its impact. So I think keeping it as a unique boss enemy was actually a pretty good decision. That's an example of a gameplay change that I believe positively impacts the story, because every kind of change impacts the story. I've often heard it said a lot that this remake doesn't fundamentally alter the story of Silent Hill 2, and I only think that's true if you take the broad strokes. Like, yes, Silent Hill 2 is still fundamentally a game about a man looking for his dead wife. That hasn't changed. So if you are the kind of person who sees a game's story as just a linear sequence of events, then yes, Silent Hill 2 Remake didn't change the plot. However, video games are much more than just the literal sequence of events that takes place. I need you to understand this. Everything you do in a game impacts how that story is conveyed, the length of the game, the individual cutscenes, etc., etc. So by changing the entire genre of the game and massively lengthening all the areas and changing some of the boss fights around, they have, definitionally, changed the story. Maybe you consider that idea too pretentious or something, I don't know, I think it's just a fundamental fact of how video games are constructed, but that's fine. What I think is pretty undeniable in terms of story edits, however, is the way they have changed almost all of the dialogue in any given cutscene. Sure, these cutscenes approximately map onto the original cutscenes, but the exact lines that are being said and the deliveries are often quite different. And we could discuss the individual merits of some of these changes. Like I said, I highlighted the Maria garden scene as a standout, really bad inclusion that I do not like at all. But for the most part, scenes are subtly changed in ways that don't massively impact the overall flow, but do give a different impression of the characters. James is a lot more personable and a lot less standoffish over the course of the game, openly offering assistance to the people he meets as he goes, which he never did in the original. In particular, in a completely new cutscene added with Angela at the foot of this statue, James offers to go with Angela to escape the town, which isn't even his current goal at that point in the narrative, so I have no idea what he's talking about. He's looking for Mary. And we could go on like this, analysing individual character moments and so on. I don't fundamentally think they've done a bad job with this portrayal of the characters, but it is worth noting that they are different characters now. Their inner turmoils and struggles are approximately the same, but they definitely come off differently. This is a change that ultimately could be considered kind of lateral, but it's another example to me of how Silent Hill 2 2024 is just not the same game as the original in basically any respect. It's a completely new game. If you want the experience of that original story, you're still going to have to play that original story. I'm not trying to gatekeep Silent Hill 2 from you when I say this. You know, I'm not saying this to be like, oh, you're not a true Silent Hill 2 fan if you didn't play the original game, etc, etc. That's not my point, it's just the basic ontological acknowledgement that these two things are different things. And I really think this is worth stressing, because on the run-up to release, I had people tell me that, you know, Silent Hill 2 Remake is one of the most necessary remakes of all time. You can't play Silent Hill 2 on any modern hardware, so this needed to be made. I don't see how this solves that problem. They haven't created the Silent Hill 2 experience for modern platforms, they've created a completely different video game that has the same name. Resident Evil 2 Remake really opened the door for this kind of thing, and honestly, I don't think Resident Evil 2 Remake got enough scrutiny for doing this. And I think fundamentally that only happened because people don't really respect Resident Evil 2 as a story, which is a little sad that we treat one of the most popular PlayStation games that way. Modern gaming will not rest until every good thing from the PlayStation 1 and 2 has been remade in the form of a modern game-approved third-person over-the-shoulder camera shooter. And this overall is why I think Silent Hill 2 Remake will not be seen as a timeless classic, and overall, I still think the original is the superior experience. Because for all the merit that Silent Hill 2 Remake does have as an individual game, it is pretty good. If you're looking to kill 20 hours of your life and spend $70 in the process, Silent Hill 2 Remake is not a half-bad way of doing it. I had a good time with it, certainly. I don't regret playing it, not by any means. But it can't escape the reality that Silent Hill 2 Remake only exists to fill space in a release lineup. A popular game cannot be accessed on modern platforms, so create a remake to hold that spot. I've actually done a lot of soul-searching recently about how I feel about video game remakes because of Silent Hill 2 Remake, and I've come to the conclusion that I'm not actually creatively completely opposed to the concept of remaking a video game, despite what this video would probably lead you to believe. It's just that, because video games are so expensive to make, you really need to see a return on that investment. You don't tend to remake a game for fun, you know? It's gotta make its money back, so it's gotta appeal to the broadest possible audience, it's gotta use the most trendy design tenets of its day, things that will very much date the game in about 10 years. And you know, every game is dated as a result of its time. I don't think Silent Hill 2 the original is timeless, it's very much a product of the fact it was made in 2001. But while Silent Hill 2 the original dates itself based on the hardware limitations and the fact that 3D game design was not yet a solved problem, quote-unquote, Silent Hill 2 Remake dates itself more based on the market trends of the current day, which is a much lamer reason to be a product of your time. In particular, the fact the game has been remade as a third-person over-the-shoulder shooter is really telling, because this is the approved format that I'm supposed to take as unilaterally a positive step forward, which is ludicrous. Why am I supposed to just accept that this genre is superior somehow to this? Why is that an unquestionable improvement to you? This is only ever a one-way street. People always suggest remaking old games in the format of modern third-person shooters, but they never ever suggest remaking The Last of Us in the form of a turn-based RPG, now do they? Such notion would be considered ludicrous. That's not trendy, that's not modern. But why not? Why don't we see those kinds of things? Because it isn't marketable. It's not profitable. These remakes are not driven by a desire to be in conversation with the original or remake a classic in a new format. They're driven by a desire to fill space in a release lineup. To have something to sell that can occupy the gap that the original classic left behind. And that in itself is the reason it will be left behind. Silent Hill 2 Remake inadvertently highlights the distinction between making a good product and making good art. Silent Hill 2 Remake is a very good product. Bloober Team managed to wrangle a pretty good game out of a not especially good production circumstance, and for that they should be lauded. But it is not good art. Hey, thanks for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, please consider subscribing to the channel and leaving a comment. I'm trying out a different format with this, and an entirely new channel at that, so if you did like it, I really would appreciate you letting me know. And also, if you want your name in these credits here, consider supporting on the Patreon, which now gives you access to 2 channels worth of videos instead of just the 1. I hope to bring you many game rambles in the near future. They won't all be as pretentious as this, but I hope you look forward to them nevertheless. Thanks again for watching. See you next time.